track there from the Looky Loos. It was called Sweet Release here on Kiwi. Time now is 16 minutes past 7.
The Radio Whammo Breakfast.
Talking politics with Russel Norman.
Yes, yesterday John Key outlined his plans for 2010. The government's plans, of course, there were tax cuts that he is also planning, as well as a rise in the GST. But also mining on conservation land and making it easier to store and irrigate water in Canterbury. For the Green perspective on this one, the reaction from the Green Party, it is co-leader Russel Norman. Good morning, Russell.
Good morning, Whammo.
What was your initial reaction to the speech?
Well, I called it the black hole, preparing for the black hole budget, because on the one hand they're going to start digging dirty grey holes in the conservation estate, and on the other hand the cuts that they're talking about are going to affect the poorest in the community the hardest. So they're going to cut back on some of the benefits, but they're also going to increase GST in order to pay for a tax cut at the top of the income tax scale.
So let's tackle that side of things first. Okay, so how do you think the various sectors of New Zealand will be affected by tax cuts and a rise in GST?
Well, because we know that when you increase GST, it disproportionately affects the poorest, just because they spend all their money because they have to, and so. What that means is that the increase in GST will fall heavily on those on lower incomes, and the money from that will be used to pay for a reduction in the top tax rate, presumably, which obviously benefits those at the top. Now, one of the real issues for New Zealand is the enormous tax avoidance that actually happens. The Tax Working Group reported that they did that IRD did an audit of the 100 richest families in New Zealand, and only half of them were paying the top tax rate now. So what we actually need to do is increase enforcement of tax, for paying tax, so that everyone pays their share. Instead, what Key's going to do is actually say, oh, well, people aren't paying their tax, therefore we'll cut the rate, because obviously we're charging them too much. Actually, we need to change the rules to make sure that everyone pays their fair share.
And then on the flip side of that, though, there will be more money flowing around the community, because people will be paying less tax.
Well, no, they'll probably make that fiscally, pretty much fiscally neutral, I would think. So because they don't have a lot of room to move in terms of the budget deficit, it means that any cut in tax will be matched by an increase in tax. That's the most likely outcome.
Okay. Let's move on from that, because that's probably short-term type stuff. Let's look at the long game. The other announcement was that the government is going prospecting. Jerry Brownlee, of course, already signalled this last year. They do want to open up some of the conservation estate to mining and release some of the wealth that is contained within Russell. Yeah,
I mean, the thing is that this isn't we're not talking about the general conservation estate. This is what's called Schedule 4 lands. And Schedule 4 is the most ecologically important pieces of land that are put into Schedule 4. And so the government wants to take those out so they can mine them. The real issue is that it's just incredibly short-term thinking. We're going to mine our way to prosperity. Actually, New Zealand needs to have a long-term plan for its economy, which is based on our advantages, which is around fresh water, clean and green, and also our intelligence. There is a green economic revolution happening all around the planet, and if we want to actually be prosperous, then we need to be part of that.
But
we're turning away from it.
Because you've brought up this word prosperous. When John Key is talking about going forward and becoming a better country, he doesn't talk in terms of prosperity, though, does he? He talks about wealth. Is there a difference?
Yeah, I mean, and Labor's pretty similar, but Labor and National share, this thing that what we have to do is grow GDP at all costs. What I think we want is prosperity. So, when we grow GDP, which means that everyone works longer hours, and everyone has two jobs, I mean, each family, both partners work, then, we have less time at home, less time for our kids, less time doing the things we like. Remember, they're going to get rid of the extra week's holiday. So it seems to me prosperity is about having time to do the things we want, and growing GDP is just about working harder and dumber.
One of the things that he also announced when it comes to mining the conservation estate, he says that he will also put a penny in the green bucket, if you will, for conservation projects at the same time that he's doing the mining. Now, that sounds good on one hand.
Yeah, he's got a great Orwellian line in the speech. He says something like, an increase in mining will result in an increase in environmental protection. Mining the conservation estate will increase environmental protection. So what he's done is when the government came in, they abolished the fund that the Green Party set up under the last government, which was a community conservation fund, which funded community groups, small community groups to carry out conservation efforts. So he's talking about re-establishing that fund using the money that they get from mining a conservation estate. So it's a fund that they abolished, and they're talking about possibly re-establishing it as a quid pro quo for destroying conservation. So it is quite Orwellian. War is peace, mining is conservation, and it's a trick. I mean, it's a pure straight PR to try to convince people that somehow there's some conservation good coming out of it, where actually there's no conservation good because we already had a fund.
So you're not fooled by this hush money, Russell?
No, we already had a conservation fund. He abolished it, and now he wants to re-establish it with using the money from destroying conservation.
Now, buried also inside the speech, and I think most people, in fact no one in the media seemed to mention this yesterday, but buried in there was a mention about water, irrigation and storage in Canterbury. John says he wants the government to get rid of some of the regulations, some of the roadblocks, as it were, surrounding actually getting some of these projects underway. So basically he wants to fast-track some of the stuff. Yeah, I mean,
he and his mates in Fed Farmers have been talking about damming rivers and destroying biodiversity for some time, as if Canterbury hasn't already borne enough of the cost of the mad irrigators. And so he wants to fast-track that process and throw some more government money at it. I mean, Labor already threw quite a lot of government money at it, our money, and National wants to throw some more at it in order to fast-track more irrigation projects and, destruction of some more wild rivers and filling them with pollution and polluting the groundwater.
But let's be frank with this. Most of this is for dairy farms in Canterbury, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Canterbury already has major problems as a result of dairy intensification, so all the corporate farmers down there have taken over the plains, and he wants to extend it further.
So there have been recent projects that were planned, I forget the name of them, but there were valleys that were going to be flooded, but the people of those valleys fought using the process that is available and stop these projects. Is there a possibility that these projects could be back on the table once more?
I think there's a strong possibility. The Central Plains project, but they managed to fight that through the RMA process. And the first wave of RMA reforms made it harder for communities to fight these projects, and it sounds like they're going to try to make it harder again. So there was the Waianiwa Valley, which was going to be flooded, that probably won't be now. Then there's also the Huranui, which is one of the last wild rivers just north of Christchurch that goes through Lake Sumner, a natural lake, which they want to destroy. So a number of these projects, presumably they're going to try to make it easier for them.
Russell, do you see that now going forward into the future that there will be a new generation of environmental activists, people who are prepared to lie down in front of bulldozers? There will be, no mining stickers on the back of cars. Once again, I don't know if you remember the no mining in Coromandel stickers that used to be on cars in the 80s. Are we going to see another wave of this?
I think that we will. I mean, combined with the changes that they've announced, where they're trying to review they're reviewing the advocacy role for the Department of Conservation. When you combine that with the attacks on fish and game that the government's engaged in, the changes to the RMA to make it harder for community groups to fight through the RMA process, when you put it all together, it is a systematic attack on the environment and the environment movement, and so people are going to respond.
Russel Norman, co-leader of the Greens, thanks very much for your response to John Key yesterday.
My pleasure. Thanks, mate.
25 minutes.